You know, the unique thing about this case is that you essentially start with a confession, and that is that you've got this hour-long you've got this hour-long phone call that really lays out the case, and you hear him essentially the former president threatening the Secretary of State with criminal prosecution, or that bad things were going to happen to him, and this is just the language of a mob boss, and there's. You could listen to about any tape of an organized crime case or a drug distribution ring, and you hear this kind of language. So she starts with that, and that gets pretty close to solving or closing out the day on the investigation for interference with the official performance of Secretary's duties in this case. And so I really think that part puts her head and shoulders above where she would be if she was just start from scratch. He just made the bad decision to call into a state where one party can record a call without consent, and to get in front of a prosecutor who's at least willing to take a look at his efforts to commit election fraud.
Luckily for the truth, Donald Trump has consistently had very bad advice around him. Michael J. Moore, thank you very much.
I'm always glad to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. That is tonight's last.
Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
We are in day 3 of former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial. And the House Democrats' case has been even more damning than in the first trial. Lead impeachment manager Jamie Raskin began day 1 rebutting the defense argument that the trial of an ex-president is unconstitutional by pointing out that we can't make a, quote, January exception where presidents can get away with crimes during their final days in office. Over the next several days, the House managers used never-before-seen, sometimes graphic video, and Trump's own tweets to argue that his months-long effort to overturn an election he told his supporters had been stolen led hundreds of them to storm the U.S. Capitol, a terrorist attack that left 5 dead and nearly resulted in the mass assassination of most of our political leaders. There were a lot of emotional moments over the last couple of days, but for me, the most moving part was the close of Congressman Raskin's opening speech on Tuesday when he spoke about what happened when he finally found his family after the attack. Let's play the clip.
And I told my daughter Tabitha, who's 24 and a brilliant algebra teacher in Teach for America, now, I told her how sorry I was, and I promised her that it would not be like this again the next time she came back to the Capitol with me. And you know what she said? She said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol." Of all the terrible, brutal things I saw and I heard on that day, and since then, that one hit me the hardest. That, and watching someone use an American flagpole, with the flag still on it, to spear and pummel one of our police officers ruthlessly, mercilessly, tortured by a pole with a flag on it that he was defending with his very life. People died that day.
What were your reactions watching the Democrats lay out their case over the last few days? Maybe you can talk about both the manager's argument and maybe separately the use of all the audio and video footage.
I have to admit that while I always believed that impeachment was the right and only course for the Democrats to go through, I was very sort of skeptical of even watching it because I was just frustrated by the futility of it, where this, just like the previous impeachment where I sat in front of the TV for hours, as we all did, to watch that trial, right, knowing that the jury was rigged. Yet, when I sat down to watch it, including Congressman Raskin's presentation, I was riveted by it. It really sort of brought me back to the moment we were all sitting in front of our TV on January 6th, watching sort of in horror and shock and fear as something that we didn't really imagine would happen in America in this day was happening before our eyes. That there were people's lives were in danger. The Capitol was being taken over by a mob. There were people flying the Confederate flag in the United States Capitol, a building that you and I have both worked in, where we have friends who currently work and people we know, reporters who cover it. But even though that was only 5 weeks ago, I have felt like the emotions of that day had grown somewhat attenuated with the distance in our very weird pandemic social media world. And that brought me right back to that moment, to just how scary that was. The argument, and I think that's what the video clips certainly did more than anything else. The video they used to open with, the video clips, the security footage that was then used in day 2, all were a reminder of just how scary this was and what it felt like to be watching it on that day. The argument is open and shut. It is like, this is not even, it is an absolute embarrassing farce that there is even a question as to whether not just 2/3 of the Senate, but the entire Senate isn't going to vote for this. This is a man who very clearly and very obviously incited a violent insurrection and sent a mob to kill the people who worked there. And now many of the people who worked there, who came with it, as we now know, within milliseconds, in inches of being the victims of that mob,
Stop moving, I want to see how much it moves you.
Acquit the person who did it just cause.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about politics here and political implications, and I don't know if this impeachment trial will have any political implications whatsoever over the long term, or the medium term, or the short term. But sometimes you just do things because it's the right thing to do. And I had that feeling watching the impeachment trial. It is just the right thing to do, to remind a country that has a very short collective memory, shorter with each passing day, that this horrifying event took place and that this man was responsible for this event. And this man who continues to be part of public life, who has contemplated running for office again, for the same office again, a party that is still loyal to this man. Like,
To go to space.
I had forgotten over just a month. I pay attention to politics every single day. I thought that January 6th, when I was watching it unfold, was maybe one of the angriest I've been throughout the whole Trump presidency, the most terrified I've been throughout the whole Trump presidency, and that feeling had already escaped me over the last couple of weeks. So I think the country should be reminded often that this happened on January 6th, let alone one impeachment trial. I'm glad that the Democrats did this, and the Republicans who voted for it as well in the House. And I think the managers did an outstanding job sort of putting this case together, which, as you say, is an open and shut case. But we're speaking on Thursday morning, and we still have the defense lawyers are going to bring their case. We'll talk about how they've been doing so far in a second. But look, they're gonna say the riot was terrible. It was an attack. Ted Cruz walked out of the chamber yesterday and said this was a terrorist attack on our country. Their argument is, how can you blame Donald Trump? It was just, he had some overheated rhetoric, but is it really his fault that this happened? He said a few times, go home. He said a few times, be peaceful. So can you really blame him? And I think what the managers have done over the course of the last several days is not only just made a very emotional and powerful case using that audio and video footage, but they also anticipated every single potential defense that could come from Trump's defense team and just swatted it down. Swatted it down with Trump's own tweets, with footage, with comments from other Republican officials, with comments from other White House officials. I do think it was a pretty powerful case.
Yeah, I mean, it is like, if you were someone who went into this with an open mind, then it's impossible for me to fathom how you could not walk away from this thinking that Donald Trump is guilty of this and so much more. The evidence is overwhelming.
And the choice that they made, which I thought was interesting and smart, was that they made the case for incitement much bigger than Trump's speech at the rally. They've got Trump telling people the election was stolen over and over. They showed other instances before January 6th of Trump mobs intimidating public officials because of those lies. Trump sees the danger in that, doesn't care, excuses it in the case of it happening to Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, excuses the people that did that at the Michigan State Capitol, keeps telling lies, helps organize the rally. We've got rioters saying, I'm here because of Trump. The president invited us to be here. The president wanted us to storm the Capitol. That's what they showed today. And then a huge part of the case yesterday on Wednesday is what Trump did during the attack. Because part of his defense might be, well, I didn't intend for it to get out of control like that. Well, if that's the case, why are there Republicans and White House officials on record saying that Trump was pleased and excited by the attacks? Why didn't he listen to Republicans who were calling the White House from the Capitol, pleading him to tell his supporters to go home? Why did he send a tweet attacking Mike Pence after he learned that Mike Pence's life was in danger? A tweet that was then read aloud through a bullhorn by the rioters outside the Capitol. They read through a bullhorn a Trump tweet attacking Mike Pence after Mike Pence was carried out of the Senate chamber because they were trying to fucking hang him. And I do think, because it was all sort of in the fog of war, and we were watching it all unfold that day, sort of hard to keep track of everything that happened. And I'm sure if you were a senator or a House member who was in the Capitol, it was probably hard to put together what was going on outside and what was going on in other parts of the Capitol. And I do think the House managers did a really effective job connecting all the dots in a real logical order, so that these senators, if they do have an open mind, which I'm sure many of them do not, would be able to understand, perhaps for the first time, just how extensive the attack was and how much Trump had to do with it, both ahead of time and how much he refused to stop it during the attack itself.
I mean, just embedded in the various examples you give are what would be smoking gun pieces of evidence. And if this were a normal criminal trial and not a political process with a rigged jury, the Mike Pence example is the best one. Only Donald Trump thought that Mike Pence had the power to stop the election. This was not a talking point amongst a bunch of different legal scholars. This was just some weird thing that someone told Donald Trump that he got in his head. And he said it to this very group of people that morning before they marched to the White House. That is the piece of evidence. And then these Republicans come back and they say, well, Donald Trump gave this video where he told people to go home. Now, once again, neither of us are attorneys. We will not be confused for constitutional law scholars, by most, I guess. But here's one thing I do know about the law, is that if you set a fire and then afterwards begrudgingly put it out under pressure, you are still guilty of arson. And so the fact that after he incited the crowd and sent them to the White House to hang his vice president, if he later told them to go home, that is not exculpatory in some way.
No, and in fact, the House managers made the case this morning that they have a couple of the rioters on record saying, as soon as Trump finally said hours into the attack, go home, hey, everyone, we should go home. Trump just told us to go home. Before he told us to come here, now he's telling us to go home, so we should go home. Just proving that they felt directed by the President of the United States, which of course they were. So Donald Trump's defense lawyers responded to these very powerful, emotional arguments with, honestly, a performance that makes fucking Rudy Giuliani sound like Atticus Finch. I mean, it was just his lead lawyer, Bruce Castor, known previously as the guy who declined to prosecute Bill Cosby. I don't know where they found this guy. I guess they couldn't find anyone else. Bruce Castor kicked things off with a 48-minute rambling speech where he didn't make a cohesive argument about anything, but at one point did praise the House Democrats' presentation, said that they did a great job. Here's a taste of what you may have missed from Bruce Castor.
that no, when you're driving down the street and you look over at your wife and you say, hey, you know what? That guy's about to drive through the red light and kill that person. Your wife can testify to what you said, because even though it's technically hearsay, is an exception because it's the event living through the person. Why? No opportunity for reflective thought.
Could you detect any kind of an argument there? Certainly, I don't know. I don't know what that was. I literally don't know what he was referencing at all. What legal, how that had any kind of connection to this case whatsoever. But like, maybe you should try to answer, what case was Bruce Castor trying to make? What was he supposed to be making?
Great question, John. I am curious who Trump was in that little story there. Is he the
driving, running through the red light, the wife?
The person incapable of reflective thought? Was that the point? Like, I did not understand that. There were two arguments, I think, embedded in the case put forward both by Bruce Castor and then David Schoen, who did a slightly better job. I will say one thing about Bruce Castor, though. As a general rule, if you were making a legal presentation on national television and My Cousin Vinny starts trending, not ideal, right? Like, that's a sign that maybe you missed the mark. But the two arguments were, the first one was contradictory. The House moved too fast in the sense that they did not give Trump due process rights, which that's not a thing that actually exists in the impeachment process. But they moved too fast. But then they also moved too slow because he is no longer president. And that is ultimately the crux of the Republican case that I think it's the fig leaf these Republicans use to justify their acquittal vote, is as a private citizen, as a former president, he is ineligible for the impeachment process. And that process was designed for presidents. Now, there is a gigantic problem to that, which Congressman Raskin called the January exception. I think of it slightly differently, which is essentially at the core of the Trump legal team's argument is the legal argument underpinning the plot of the movie The Purge. It is this idea that there is a period of time by which you can commit crimes with no consequences. Because that's really what it's saying here, because we just have to put a fine point on it. Because these Republicans believe, and it is the opinion of the Department of Justice for decades, that a sitting president cannot be tried in criminal court, cannot be indicted for crimes committed while they are president. And that is because the Constitution has prescribed impeachment as the appropriate forum for adjudicating presidential crimes. Yet at the same time, these people are saying that if the crime committed while president that is ineligible for civilian criminal prosecution is discovered after that person is president, then they cannot face any accountability for it. And so what it really does create, this is why the January exception rule comment by Congressman Raskin so rises, there is obviously a period of a week, a few days, 3 weeks between when a president is leaving office and when they have left office where they can commit crimes, because you can't impeach them fast enough to hold them accountable for it.
There's also just a glaring precedent here. Like, Ulysses S. Grant's Secretary of War, William Belknap, was accused of corruption. He resigned in order to avoid impeachment. The House impeached him anyway, and then he was tried in the Senate. Happened once before in history, wasn't unconstitutional, was very constitutional, because the Senate and the House decided that it was constitutional, which is what you do around impeachment. Now, did they address the Belknap case? Of course they did not, because they were saying God knows what. I did find it very funny that a Trump advisor told Maggie Haberman that Castor was intentionally trying to reduce the emotion in the room after the House manager case, and said that what he did was a deliberate strategy. I don't know if the strategy succeeded. Even the Republicans cultishly defending Trump couldn't defend Trump's lawyers, who were criticized by Trump ass-kissers like Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, Alan Dershowitz. But of course, we were told that Trump himself had scheduled a number of meetings during the trial, and Playbook reported before it all started that actually Trump is pretty chill these days. He's, quote, reveled in his silence on Twitter and, quote, finally realizes less is more. So, What was Trump's super chill, less is more reaction to his lawyer's performance, Dan? Well, one person familiar with Trump's reaction told the New York Times that on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the angriest, Trump was an 8. So what happened to this new Zen Trump? I don't understand.
It's so funny that he left the presidency and decided to take up meetings. Something he did not do in the White House.
Just like the street lit this time.
I mean, it's just, we could yell for days about people who would credulously and anonymously report stuff about Trump's move that flies in the face of everything we know of Trump over the last 6 years, not to mention his decades of public life. Like that is embarrassing. But of course, I do think that the Trump legal case is somewhat of a microcosm of what it's been like to be a Republican who supports Trump this whole time, which is all you want is like the barest fig leaf to justify your cowering at the feet of Trump. And then Trump never gives it to him because he's so incompetent, or he just admits, much like the last impeachment, we're like, no, he wasn't demanding a quid pro quo. And Trump's like, yes, I wanted a quid pro quo. Like, that is what I want. That's what a deal maker does. They're like, ugh. It's a similar thing. Like, we can get to Bill Cassidy, but these Republicans are frustrated because they couldn't even get something within the same universe as credible for a rationale for acquitting Trump other than we just do what Trump wants because we're Republicans and we think that's good politics for us.
So we, I think, appropriately made fun of the idea that Trump has discovered some new kind of discipline in his post-presidency. But do you think it is weird that we haven't heard from him? Like, I realize that he doesn't have his Twitter account. He has many other outlets available to him to speak through. He has many friendly outlets available to him to speak to. He could call up his Fox and Friends pals, call up his pal Sean Hannity, get a bunch of softballs. Do you think that he's actually worried that he may say something that could get him convicted or change some Republican senators' minds? Or is he just lazy and doesn't want to talk to the press?
It's probably a combination of fear of legal consequences and laziness. I think that's probably... if you remember back when there was the discussion about what Trump would do if he was forced to testify or give an interview to Mueller, and the people who had been engaged with Trump in his pre-presidential legal shenanigans point out that like his mind focuses like a laser when it feels like he might go to jail. A very diffuse, weak laser, but relative. This is all, it's all comparative compared to normal. And so it could be that he has been convinced that the best thing for him to do is stay quiet. And there was probably a combination of things here. If he had his Twitter account and he could get his message out unfiltered, he probably would just do that. I think he's probably avoiding helping Fox because he feels like he has them a little bit over the barrel right now. So I don't know. I feel like I've just done psychoanalysis of Trump, and that's sort of what we argue against. But I agree with you. It is bizarre that he has been able to remain quiet in some way, shape, or form for weeks now. He hasn't really given an interview to anyone since the election, right?
No, not at all.
It's been,
I also think it's, Twitter announced yesterday that they're going to continue the permanent ban on on Donald Trump's Twitter account, even if he runs for office again, which we may not get a conviction or a vote to make sure he can't run again. But it does seem like if he is permanently banned from Twitter, that could make it pretty hard.
Do you think you can run for, not to hijack the very specific outline we did, but do you think you can run for president if you're banned from Twitter?
We might find out.
Yeah.
I think it's
do you
hard.
think you can credibly run for president?
Here's why I think it's hard. A very small percentage of the American people are on Twitter. We know that, right? Like, it seems like the world to all of us news, political junkies, vast majority of people are not on Twitter. Way more people are on Snapchat. Way more people are on Facebook, right? Like, it's pretty small. But every fucking journalist in the world is on Twitter. And in that way, Twitter sets the media narrative. And if you're not part of that and you're running for office and you can't just speak how you want or get a message out on Twitter, I think it could make it difficult. Now, Trump has a vast right-wing propaganda machine at his disposal, And the first step, of course, is to win the Republican primary. So if you're going to win the Republican primary, do you need to be on Twitter, or can you just talk through the right-wing media ecosystem? You can probably do that, and then if you win the nomination, then you do get attention because now you're the party's nominee. So that's the path for him. I think it's probably harder if you're a Democrat running for president because you don't have
sure.
All you have is just you're coming on Pod Save America every day, right?
I mean, as you would have to if you had any hope of getting the nomination.
As you would have to. Just look at Joe Biden right now. Okay, anyway, now we're way off track. So back to Trump's lawyers, who not only pissed off their client, they actually pissed off a Republican senator so badly that he switched his vote to join 5 other Republicans and 50 Democrats in affirming the constitutionality of the trial itself. Bill Cassidy of Louisiana told reporters on Tuesday, quote, "If I'm an impartial juror and one side is doing a great job and the other side is doing a terrible job on the issue at hand, as an impartial juror, I'm going to vote for the side that did the good job." Imagine that. What a refreshing, weird thing to hear. Cassidy's vote did not go over very well with the Louisiana State Republican Party, which released a statement on Tuesday saying they were, quote, profoundly disappointed in the senator. Do you think Cassidy's explanation of why he did it is the truth?
I think what you just quoted there is why he did it. I do believe that. I would just note, it is not how trials work. It's not a performance. It's not America's Got Talent for lawyers. It's like whoever presents the best argument, whether they do it coherently or not. Now, the Democrats presented the better argument here, but his reasoning was stupid. I think he did not think about this very much. I bet his staff learned he was going to vote this way at the exact same time we did. The other senators who voted in the previous iteration of this constitutionality motion to table vote thing, I think all spent a lot of time thinking about how they were going to vote, and they made a calculation for why they were going to vote for it. Cassidy, I think, just was like, these guys are a bunch of yahoos, and I'm going to vote for it. And I do believe him when he says, this tells you nothing about how I'm going to vote on the actual verdict. So I think it was a little bit of a reaction to the poor performance of Trump's attorneys, just the weakness of their argument and the emotion of seeing what happened. Did you see Doug Jones's tweet about this?
Yeah. What did he say?
Yeah.
He was shaken, not stirred.
Yeah, he was responding to some reports about all of these Republicans who were very moved by and startled and shook by these images of their colleagues almost being killed by this mob, but we're not going to change our position. And his tweet was shaken but not stirred, which I thought was perfect. And Doug Jones, free on Twitter without the constraints of running in a deeply red state, I'll take it.
Yeah, there's your upside. You get to make a joke on Twitter. There are also some reports that Bill Cassidy may retire at the end of this term, which would be another reason would not be as concerned about the politics. But if he doesn't, then good for him. The politics, we should point out, are not great for Republicans doing the right thing here. Data for Progress did a poll the other day. 69% of Republican voters said they'd be less likely to vote for a political candidate if that person found Trump guilty in the trial. You look at numbers like that, and you're a Republican senator, and you think, okay, maybe it's the right thing to do to convict him, but I would easily lose a primary with numbers like that. And if I did vote to convict, there's not enough of us to actually make it real. So is it just a waste of my time doing that? I mean, from a political standpoint, can you blame them from thinking? I mean, I can certainly blame them and do blame them from a moral, ethical standpoint, but they probably have the politics correct, sadly.
Yes and no. Yes, it is true that the politics are currently that, and the political downside for a Republican voting to convict in most cases going to greatly exceed the upside. But there's also an element of a self-fulfilling prophecy here, which is no one has tried to make the other argument. They all allowed the election, the big lie about the election, to fester. They promoted it. Almost all of them. There's a small handful of skeptics. Remember, most of these people would not refer to Joe Biden as the president-elect for like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then they're like shocked that their voters think the election was stolen. There is this I guess it's really self-fulfilling short-termism to how they approach this. yes, it's true, but they have not tried to make the opposite argument. They haven't tried to move the party away from this level of radicalization. They have just constantly fed into the radicalization because that's what benefited them in the 5 minutes in front of them, as opposed to thinking 5 months, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so, yes, that's what the politics are, but the politics are that way because they have allowed them to be that way because they haven't had the gumption to actually do anything about it.
And I will say the most contemptible Republican senators are the ones who don't have to face voters again and are still voting that the trial is unconstitutional or to exonerate Trump, like Rob Portman of Ohio, who announced that he's not going to be running again and yet still voted that the trial is unconstitutional, which is complete bullshit. And Rob Portman knows that. He's a smart guy. And not going to face voters again, so he can't use the political excuse. Just decided to vote that way anyway. So there is, just when you think maybe it's all this political pressure for these, no, some of them just do the wrong thing because they're assholes. That's it. So no other Republican senators, aside from the 6 who voted in favor of constitutionality, have given any signal that they might vote to convict. That includes Mitch McConnell, even though Bloomberg has reported and Politico has reported that sources close to McConnell say he hasn't yet made up his mind. There we go. Team Mitch out there spinning reporters again that Mitch McConnell still hasn't made up his mind. I think those sources are full of shit. What do you think, Dan?
It's so embarrassing for the people who wrote that story. It is so embarrassing. It's how many times are you going to go to the same well and look like an asshole over and over and over again?
Why do you continue letting fucking Josh Holmes and the other fucking Team Mitch assholes out there spin you? Don't let them fucking embarrass you like this just because they want to still be part of the establishment and they want all their fucking K Street buddies and all the rest of it. Like, give me a break. Mitch McConnell, like, there is reporting that, like, you know, in that Bloomberg report that McConnell has told every senator to vote their conscience. It does seem like, what do you think Team Mitch's strategy is here? They're trying to, like, make sure he has it both ways so that he's not crossing Trump and the Trump base, but also is, you know, doing enough to try to get corporate donations back in the party. Like, what do you think they're trying to do?
Yes,
here?
that is exactly right. He is trying
they want the money back.
They want the money and they want the MAGA base. He's trying to find a way to navigate that because he needs to raise hundreds of millions of dollars in super PAC money from very wealthy people and corporate interests to hold on to the Senate. And many of those corporate interests are very uncomfortable with what happened on January 6th and since then. And some of them have stopped giving to Republicans. Some of them have stopped giving to both parties, which is really fucking stupid. We're so angry about what Republicans are doing that we're not going to help Democrats get elected. It's a very, very, very short-sighted way of thinking of things. And so he's trying to have it both ways, and he is successfully having it both ways right now. It's exactly what he is doing. He has created this fiction that he is trying to rid the party of Trumpism while also doing everything he can to enable the party's continued affiliation with Trumpism.
Yeah.
And people are fucking falling for it because Capitol Hill reporters have decided that that's unfair. I don't want to say that.
If Mitch McConnell decided tomorrow that he was going to vote to convict Donald Trump, it wouldn't ensure conviction, but it would absolutely open the door to a bunch of other Republican senators potentially convicting him. Mitch McConnell has that power, and he just is choosing not to use it. And that is a choice he has made. So where do we go from here? Like, the Republicans just get to acquit Trump, wait a few days for everyone to forget, then move on to whining about Joe Biden not taking the deficit and bipartisanship seriously, and that's that?
Yep, that's what's going to happen.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is an element of defeatism that can come from this process, as it did from the last impeachments, where you have a president who does something that is clearly wrong, clearly worthy of removal, clearly criminal, and gets away with it. And Republicans want to weaponize that to make you feel like your vote does not matter, your participation does not matter, because cynicism is the greatest ally to conservatism. Because they will do better if our voters tune out of the process. And I think we have to take the long view about what to do here, right? Which is, this is one step, and it is a painful step and a frustrating step in doing two things. The first is making the Republicans pay a political price for everything that they have done over the last many, many years. And that next opportunity comes in 2022. And we have to bring the same sort of long-term thinking, the same sort of enthusiasm and organizing and investment to the 2022 elections that we brought to the 2018 elections, because they're making the case for why the stakes are just as high, even when Trump is not in the office. And the second one is that what is happening before us, if presuming the Republicans vote to acquit, is yet another crystal clear example of how broken our democracy is. And you see it in the polling where it says 56% of the public wants Trump to face removal and the consequences come from it, and 44% think he should be acquitted. In a normal functioning democracy, that would be really bad news for the 44%. But 44% is basically what you need to hold on to the Senate and be within spitting distance of the White House with our rigged politics. And so we need to take what is happening here and use it as an argument for the things we care most about, including the For the People Act, voter expansion, democratic reform, and do all of that. Like that is where we go from here, and being defeatist and cynical about the outcome only aids those who are seeking to shield Trump from any sort of accountability.
I also think a fiction still exists that among certain Democratic politicians that a lot of Republican senators, Republican House members can be dealt with, reasoned with, negotiated with. And look, in fairness, Joe Biden was accused of believing in that fiction during most of the campaign. I think the actions of the administration so far have showed that he doesn't necessarily believe that. And that his view of unity is bigger than just the politicians in Washington and involves the whole country, so that's good. But I think people like Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, who are still sitting there thinking, yeah, we can work with Republicans and we can get big things done and we don't have to get rid of the filibuster. I saw reports that Joe Manchin was fairly outraged with being reminded of what happened and Donald Trump's role in it over the last several days. And maybe if you're Manchin and you're Sinema and you're sitting there and you're watching these Republicans just go on and acquit Donald Trump, you think to yourself, maybe we can't work with them, And maybe this isn't what does it, but it certainly builds the case that something fundamentally is broken with the Republican Party, that these aren't just people who can't sit down and negotiate over tax cuts and deficits and whatever else anymore, that they are protecting someone who incited an attack on democracy, and that is much bigger than just having a difference with the other party. So there's one other way to hold Trump accountable now that he is a private citizen. The district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, has opened a criminal investigation into efforts made to influence the results of the presidential election in Georgia. As you might remember, Trump threatened Georgia election officials. He asked them to find him more votes. He abused his power in a desperate attempt to overturn the results in that state. We all remember that. Now, Fulton County DA Fannie Williams has asked state Republicans to keep documents related to the investigation, writing in a letter that specifically mentioned Trump, quote, "This investigation includes, but is not limited to, potential violations of Georgia law prohibiting the solicitation of election fraud, the making of false statements to state and local government bodies, conspiracy, racketeering, violation of oath of office, and any involvement in violence or threats related to the elections administration." Gee, who could that involve? What is this case or this potential investigation opened by the Fulton County DA into what happened around the election in Georgia? What does that mean for Trump going forward?
Well, it certainly could mean that there will be discovery. Trump could be subject to subpoenas. He could likely at some point be required to testify. Now, I'm sure that all of the people who are currently arguing that Trump cannot be impeached for action now that he's not president also cannot be convicted for actions he committed while president. But it is a state case, so that argument's a little bit harder, and the DOJ opinion does not apply. But it is. Trump faces, just put aside what's happening in the Senate, Trump faces an array of incredibly challenging legal problems going forward. He has got what's happening in New York State. He's got his businesses, his foundations under investigation. But this is him. This is Donald Trump himself being investigated for a crime of which he is on tape committing. And if they were to proceed and an indictment were to happen, he's going to have to testify. He would potentially face trial. What the legal penalties are and whether they're throwing a book at Donald Trump. Are we going to see him frog march down to Mar-a-Lago? Who knows? But it is deeply concerning. And it is one of the reasons why the idea that Donald Trump is most definitely running for president in 2024, I think, is sometimes a little ahead of its skis because
it's good to meet you.
He has a lot of problems to traverse between now and when it comes time to start showing up in an Iowa pizza ranch again.
Same with you.
So yeah, no, I think
things
I
that do
think
pray
he
and
has some
then
problems. So the other consequence
doing impure things,
that
not
may
good for your eyes
come
as a new
from,
player.
not only this impeachment trial, but sort of the insurrection that is the cause of the impeachment trial, is for the larger Republican Party. Some news on that front from the New York Times yesterday. Across just 25 states, across just the 25 states that report party registration data, almost 140,000 voters have left the Republican Party since the attack in January. Now, it is normal for parties to shed some voters after an election, especially the losing party, but this is significantly more than the 79,000 voters who've left the Democratic Party over the same period. Republicans have lost more than 12,000 voters in Pennsylvania, nearly 8,000 in North Carolina, and more than 10,000 in Arizona, where Biden won by around the same amount. A Gallup poll on Wednesday also showed that only 37% of Americans now have a favorable view of the Republican Party, a decrease over the last few months that gives the Democratic Party a double-digit advantage on favorability, with 48% of people approving of Democrats.
Do you want to watch that?
Is this just noise?
I suggest go check out
what
that thing.
happens to a losing party, or
you
is this
don't,
a more
I'm just
notable
going to
shift?
invite them.
I think we need to know more about who these voters are. Are
My advice,
these
go chill with Debris and them lot. They can
Romney
be doing
Clinton
more fun
suburban
things.
Republicans who voted for a Democrat in 18, voted for Biden and are shifting? Are they
I will
more
invite you.
moderate voters who are
This person
angry
doesn't
that Trump
understand.
engaged in an insurrection? Or are they more conservative, more MAGA voters who are angry at Republicans because they didn't help with the insurrection?
Yeah.
Right, in which case, now, even if it's that, even if it's the latter, we saw what happened in Georgia in the runoffs. These could be voters who are big Trump fans, pissed about how the Republican Party handled the insurrection and think that they're not sufficiently defensive of Donald Trump. And they might be dropping out of the party and dropping out of politics altogether.
Yeah, I think the latter is more concerning for Republicans than the former.
Right. And some of it could be, a CBS poll released this week found that 70% of Republicans would consider joining a new political party founded by Donald Trump. Now, there was some reporting from Maggie Haberman when this was first raised a couple weeks ago that Trump quickly decided that a third party wouldn't be the best idea, because if he founded a third party, it would be hard to stick it to Republicans during Republican primaries that he wanted to punish.
I mean, yes, that is true, but the primary reason why he's not starting a third party is the same reason why he's not starting a television network or a social media company, is he's lazy and dumb. Yeah, work is the greatest impediment to Donald Trump doing anything. I think it's hard to know what this is all going to mean. There was a lot of reports about the Republican Party falling apart after Obama won in 2008. He won a surprisingly large share of Republican voters. The party consolidated around Republicans in opposition to Obama. It is the thing we're going to need to know about these people who have left the Republican Party is, are they not voting? Or are they voting for Democrats, or are they just independents who vote for Republicans? Because the traditional thing here is when you use an election, a bunch of people they quit the party and they become independents, but they remain Republican voters. They're either independents or what you would call an NPA or a nonpartisan affiliation, and this has happened so often, which is why incumbent presidents almost always lose the independent vote share when they run for re-election. Because it's not that they became less popular, although that may be part of it, but that the pool of independent voters just contains more people who profile as members of the other party. Obama won by a huge percentage of independents in 2008, lost by I think 1 or 2 in 2012. But if you're like it is very clear the Republicans are divided in a whole bunch of fronts here, and that presents a political opportunity for Democrats. So it's not. I'm not trying to pour water on the parade or whatever the right metaphor is.
Yeah, well, and the other thing we don't know about these voters who've left is we talked about it from the perspective of were they happy with the insurrection? Were they upset about the insurrection? It may not have to do with the insurrection at all. There was a couple voters who spoke to the New York Times about leaving the Republican Party. One of them talked about how they were upset that the Republican Party wouldn't back a $15 minimum wage, and Democrats did, which brings up, the possibility that some of these voters are potentially, who are leaving the Republican Party, are potentially open to Democrats if, Democrats propose certain policies, have a certain agenda, look like they're fighting for them. Ezra Klein tweeted last week, one thing you really see in the Romney child allowance plan, Romney proposed, I think, $4,000 per child, is that all those studies saying social issues split the left and unite the right, but economic issues unite the left and split the right are true. What do you think about that?
I think that's exactly right. It's not, and I think we should be very clear that it's not an argument that Democrats shouldn't talk about social issues. Yep. We absolutely should. We have to. Our voters care about them. They're important. Reproductive rights, civil rights, voting rights, immigration, right, are under tremendous threat from this Republican Party, and we have to talk about them. But when we think about how we're going to make the case against Republicans, there are some very obvious economic wedge issues here. Donald Trump had more success with quote-unquote working-class voters in a multiracial way than any Republican in a very long time. Now, it's all bullshit, and we know that, but he was able to sort of sell this populism.
That's actually pretty cool.
He is banned from Twitter and therefore apparently doesn't exist anymore, and so the Republican Party is embodied by a bunch of congressional Republicans whose two primary goals in life are cutting Medicare and Social Security to pay for tax cuts for corporations. And so you would imagine that there is some opportunity for Democrats
to be fair,
go get some of the voters, go get back some of the voters who supported Obama over Romney when the economy was the centerpiece of that election that we lost in the years to come, because this version of the Republican Party is not what they, at least we believe incorrectly,
there's also the fact that you can
so I think there are real opportunities there. We really have to think very strategically and creatively about what are our economic wedge issues that we can use. And the $15 minimum wage must be high on that list.
Another proof point here, Donald Trump was impeached twice, incited an insurrection against the Capitol, did all kinds of just heinous shit over the last 4 years. The two moments he was least popular, his approval rating was the lowest out of 4 years, was trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act and passing a tax cut for the rich.
So, a fucking gore in this game is probably going to be
more
0
so
to
than
none.
The insurrection itself.
I wouldn't be surprised
which does tell you about the opportunity Democrats have to.
Hey, I'm trying to figure out collision. Can I move you? No, I can't.
That speaks to.
There's supposed to be collisions in this game.
Black Americans, brown Americans, white Americans, and hopefully build a multiracial working class coalition in this country that can help split the Republican Party and sort of exploit some of the divisions that exist in that party right now.
And that's going to require actually achieving some of the things we ran on, which is why figuring out a way to ensure we get this $15 minimum wage done as part of this bill is absolutely critical. Because talking about it, the way people view politics right now, talking about it but not achieving some of those things is not critical. So we're going to have to achieve some of those things and then put Republicans appropriately and correctly on the other side of those issues.
Oh, wait, hold on.
And people are going to have to feel the change in their lives. We can't just tell them we achieved it. They're actually going to have to feel it. All right, well, everyone have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week.
Happy President's Day, I guess.
It's a good President's Day. We finally have a good president. Check out What a Day on Friday morning. Akilah and Gideon have Dr. Fauci on the show. You don't want to miss that. Check that out. That's tomorrow, Friday morning on What a Day. Finally, we're having a President's Day weekend sale at the Crooked Store, Dan. Everything is 15% off through Monday. Like I'm a car salesman. So head to crooked.com/store. Check out all the new merch. 15% off. President's Day weekend. Big sale.